Hello and welcome to another episode of 1000 Actually Fun Books, where we review books of every genre, looking for the best of fun escapist books. And today we're doing a book called Of Monsters and Mainframes by Barbara Truelove. This is a book kind of hard to classify. It's either a sci-fi book or a fantasy book, a mixture of the two. So what you have for a plot is a spaceship named Demeter. Demeter is an AI in the ship, and her first voyage, at least the first voyage in the ship, in the book, I don't know whether it's her first voyage generally, she docks and discovers all of her passengers have been killed, and it's by Dracula. So the rest of the book, there's a whole bunch of other classic monsters that get involved with her, so lots of people die, and then eventually the monsters some of them get together and try and work with our spaceship to kill Dracula. So Dracula is the big bad, and all the other monsters are bad, but maybe not that bad. And so our ship, Demeter, is out trying to, she isn't initially trying to track down and kill Dracula. She just wants to not have all her passengers keep dying. So, yes, it's kind of a really interesting mix, a conglomerate of different genres there that kind of mish together. I would say that there is a touch of horror in this, kind of brushing the edge of, think of all the classic monsters, lots of people dying. But I probably wouldn't classify it as horror. Okay, so things I like about it. The first thing would be saying the plot. So there's lots of creative writing, clever tactics used by either the characters or the author on maneuvering the plot where you want to go. It starts out a little bit slow because you have a monster attack, a monster attack, a monster attack, and so you're kind of like, is this just going to be endless monster attacks? What's up with this? So it's probably about page 200 of our 400 plus pages, so about halfway through before you really start getting into it and getting to know the characters besides our spaceship and getting to like them. It takes quite a while, so it's kind of a slow pace on that. It's not slow pace in the fact that things aren't happening, because obviously all these monster attacks, it's a lot of adrenaline, lots of thriller action, but it's slow pace in that you're kind of like, when is the plot going to kick in? And it takes about half the story to get there. But once it does, it's very good, I think. I think it's very interesting how the monsters decide to get together and what their motives are and what they're doing, and then how they execute their plot with overcoming obstacles along the way. So I think the plot is creative and good. So that's a thing I like. The action I thought was really good. A lot of, again, especially towards the end, adrenaline rush type of scenes with lots of things happening and lots of different players doing different things, trying to make the best outcome, whatever that best may be, of the situation that's going to be dramatically dangerous. The Demeter, our main AI character. So she is probably the main character of the book, although there's plenty of places where she is not the focus of the book. Kind of chapters will switch to whoever is the focus. There could be, here the werewolf, it's the werewolf's point of view, and here it is from a vampire's point of view, and whatever. So you have different points of view, but consistently our main ship is the focus. And I like that because it's very interesting. Our AI does not relate well to people, doesn't really understand people. There's a lot of things that happen that she doesn't have any control over. So even though she is the ship, her main focus is driving, is spaceflight. She doesn't have, for example, control over the internal workings of the ship, the doorways, the lights, the whatever system that's going on. She can sort of see what's going on, but even then, not really, because she doesn't have a software to depict what a mesh of pixels in a computer monitor or video screen, what it tells her. It doesn't mean much to her. So she has to, do some finagling to figure out what the data that she's getting even is, let alone understand how to respond to it. She doesn't necessarily understand human speech or anything like that. At one point, she writes a report for humans, and she does 70,000 pages of ones and zeros, a very detailed report, which the humans totally ignore. And she's like affronted by this. Like, she gave them all the data that they needed, and they weren't even paying attention. And so anyway, she is very much her own person. And because she is so restricted in what she's allowed to do, or even what she's allowed to think, it makes for a really interesting character as the story goes along. What is it that how is she interpreting the situation? How can she improve the situation? Would she even choose to do so versus ignoring the whole thing? So yeah, it makes for an interesting character. And by the end of the story, you like her. So that was kind of nice. There are other side characters. So for example, all the monsters that end up kind of getting together and helping her. Some of them are more likable than others. For the most part, they're not actually very likable beings, I wouldn't say. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, they aren't. They're kind of selfish and have their own motives and don't necessarily handle the situation correctly or whatever, but they make for an interesting variety how they interact with each other. So the characters are good. Although this is definitely not a character study. I mean, you feel in the end that most of the characters, except for our spaceship AI, most of them are fairly flat, very two-dimensional for who they are. And that's okay, because the focus is on the action and the plot, not the character development. Okay, there's a happily ever after, even though there is some horror involved, and even if you're kind of like, I'm not even sure that this is great that this character survives or whatever, it does end up having a happily ever after at the end. And it leaves room for a sequel, but it doesn't do so in such a way that it leaves you hanging. It's not a cliffhanger. So there's enough hints that there could be a sequel, but you don't need one. And finally, I would say I like the humor. Now, there isn't a lot of it in this book, but the handful of times that there was something humorous, I did actually think it was humorous, and they did a good job interjecting that, because otherwise this could be a fairly dour, depressing book in some areas, but the humor lightens it up well enough. Like, they're fighting a vampire, and one arm gets chopped off, and they stop fighting the vampire, and the vampire's like, can I have my arm back? And the arm is like creeping over towards her, and they're like, that is an 11 on the grossness scale. And, kicks the hand over to the vampire, and she reattaches it. So that kind of gives you the idea of the humor. Okay, so things I dislike. So this does border on horror in several areas. So one would be the gore factor. Lots of people die in lots of interesting ways. Not the greatest. Some of them, think of Call of Cthulhu. That's actually referenced in this book. And things related to that would be kind of gross. There's some body horror. We have a medical AI, separate from our ship AI, who is not exactly ethically sound, and, keeps imagining doing all sorts of things like, ooh, I wish I could get a hold of that person and do a brain biopsy. Yes, that would be fantastic. That kind of thing. This kind of a little level of gross as far as, and kind of horrifying to think that your doctor is secretly really craving doing all sorts of experiments on you or dissecting you or something. So there's a level of horror there. There's also a warning for a potential suicide. I say potential because it's not clear, the book doesn't make it clear whether this character did suicide or whether was murdered. So you could just leave that up in the air, but that's a warning. I will also say there's a warning, there's a lesbian romance in this book. It is minimal. It is not a focus of this book. There's about 2 sentences up until the epilogue. So it's not really a romance. It's just like, oh, that person's interesting. Oh, that person's interesting. And that's it for the story up until the epilogue. And then in the epilogue, you have about 2 pages with lesbian kissing. So that's a warning. Overall, I thought it was really different. We'll put it that way, really different. I would say that the ideas behind it were really interesting. I thought it worked well together as a whole for the idea for what the problem was and how they solved it and how they went about going about that, and the characters and everything to do with that. So I would probably give it a rating of 4 out of 5, and I'm going to bump it up to yes, I give it 2 thumbs up, and it's going to go on my recommended list. But, you know, it's probably not for everybody. So of the books that I've reviewed up until this point, if you really liked By Mort, then this would probably be one that you would like. Okay, so that's it for part 1. Part 2, what I'm going to do next is a mystery, historical fiction mystery. I'm going to do Not They Who Soar by Amanda Flower. So this is a murder mystery in the days of when Wilbur Wright and the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, discovered the power of flight. So I think this is their sister, I believe that's a fictional character, does some sort of investigating something, I don't know. So she's going to be a sleuth and figure out a mystery. So we'll try that one and see if it's any good, and I hope you join me next time. Thank you for watching.